Hey guys, girls, and MBs. Today we're going to be looking at creating a 3D texture inside a Touchdesigner and how, as graphic designers or artists or just people doing this for fun, you can sort of take this to the next level and utilize some of the unique combinations of things in Touchdesigner to get this effect. Quick things before I start out. This file, as is available on my Patreon, but obviously we're going to go through the whole thing and build it from scratch today. Secondly, if I am tabbing out or sound a little different, it's because I'm in my temporary setup, traveling at the moment, and I have had this is the fourth time I'm recording this video. So hopefully I don't blaze through it. And then finally, this video is hopefully a part of a bigger series, but this is going to be entirely reliant on your guys' feedback, which is that I'm really curious about how Touchdesigner can be used outside of just the mathematical and programming world. And a lot of people obviously use it for art already, but I see a lot of graphic designers and VFX artists that look to pick up this software to utilize some of the unique features, but definitely get lost in some of the more complicated tutorials and setups and just getting your head around things. So I kind of want to develop a series that's targeted towards people, that don't have a more of a technical background and sort of want to just explore the unique features of Touchdesigner, but obviously in a non overly complex sort of way. And today we'll essentially be doing 3D texturing, but as you can see by the amount of nodes on the screen, it's not overly complex, and to be honest with you, half of these we can skip over. But with all that said, let's go ahead and delete everything and do our best to recreate this. Now, I'm doing this entirely off the top of my head because I don't have a second screen, so forgive me for any mistakes. But the first thing we're going to do is drag and drop a texture file, or we can create one, don't worry. And I have this marble texture here that I've just downloaded off online. Literally anything will do. And you can drag and drop that in, or press tab and go and grab a movie file in and load it in that way. Alternatively, if you want to create a texture from scratch, you can press tab and it brings up our operator create window, and we can grab a noise top and then use that as the base of your texture. But you could also use a constant or a ramp or whatever really is up to you. I'm going to grab this noise, and if you're using this as the base of your texture, make sure you go to the common tab and you set your resolution. But for everyone else that has a texture, I can just drag this into the first input of noise like so. And essentially what I want to do here is create a bit of ruggedness, because you see our texture here has a lot of ridges and defined edges, but I want to emphasize 3D depth right now, so I want to make this a lot more rugged, and we will come back and change this texture later on, don't worry. So to do that, let's bring the offset down a lot, which offsets it above 0.1, adds a lot of white values, and we don't want to do that. Let's bring our period down, which is going to be essentially the size of the noise. You can see it decreases a lot and becomes very small and rugged. And then finally, amplitude and exponent essentially control our intensity, so I'm just going to bring the amplitude right down and maybe the exponent up so it blends in a little bit better, and for now that looks fine. It's important to remember that what we're creating is going to be projected onto a surface, but also we're going to come back and alter this texture once we actually have the 3D environment and we know how it looks. Now, since I'm wanting to create a square today, don't worry, it's easy to create a different shape if you want to do that. But what I'm going to do is between the movie file and the noise, or if you've just used the noise as your base, you can set your resolution. But I'm going to insert, so by right-clicking the line, insert operator, insert a fit, and this is going to set the default to 1000 by 1000. Perfect. And then the fit best will ensure that the image fits perfectly inside, but I actually want it to fill up the whole screen, so I'm going to change that to fill. And in fact, that's filled to stretch it. I don't want to stretch it, so I'm going to do fill outside, which is essentially just going to equally size up the image to fill the whole thing without worrying about stretching. Sweet. So the next thing going off of the noise is I'm going to do a text. Essentially, just the point of doing a text right now is to emphasize the 3D elements of embossing this texture. But obviously, if you don't need to use or create text if you don't want to. I'm going to go ahead and go to the font tab and size this up. Obviously, you can go beyond 100 if you want to, like so. Going back to text, I'm just going to leave it as the default. The font's quite ugly, but again, we're not trying to create something beautiful right now. I'm just trying to do this to demonstrate the techniques. If I go to the Output tab and click on the operation, you'll be presented with all the different compositing operations. If you're familiar with, if you're a compositing artist or use Photoshop a lot, you'll be familiar with these. If not, they're just different ways to combine two images together. And in this case, I'm just going to do average, because that's going to create, have a little bit, still have a strong divide between the two, but actually embed the texture in. But there's no reason why you can't just play around with these and literally find one that you like. But average seems to work well for me. Finally, this has added some transparency, so I could add in another noise, or like a constant. But I'm going to do a noise. Why not? The more texture, the better. I'm doing the noise because actually under the Output tab, you can see it sets the alpha, and the alpha is the transparency. It sets it to 1, which essentially just means like it's a solid like it's just filling it in with a black background. But then again, on this noise tab, we can further refine this texture. Could create like bigger blobs like that. Can really just create whatever you want. No rules whatsoever. So from here, I'm going to connect in a null and label this base texture, because it's going to act as my base texture. And then connecting off of this, I'm going to create a normal map. Sorry, this normal map is going to be the key for allowing us to utilize a lighting and 3D engine to create a more in-depth texture. Also, it's just pouring down with rain outside, so if that's coming down across my microphone, I apologize. Cool. All right, the recording software is still capturing my screen, and we're still recording. That's great. So this normal will make more sense once we create our 3D objects. So to do that, we want to press Tab again and go to our SOPs, which is our 3D objects. In this case, I'm going to get a rectangle. You can use any shape you would like. You can also set it to be any size you would like so. I'm just going to leave everything as default for now. Connecting off of the rectangle, let's do a attribute create. This is just to enable normals and tangents, so that way this object knows that we're using a normal. I'm just going to move this across. It's important to know that in Touchdesigner you can structure your files however you would like, but for scaling and understanding what's going on, it's really nice to try and neatly organize it, but we all struggle. Coming off the attribute create, it's really important now that we make sure we right click this output. A lot of beginners make this mistake and don't do this, so let's make sure we right click the output and then go across to the comp and then get the geometry. A lot of people go to the comp and grab geometry here. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong thing. And notice that there's no blue in. If you want to fix that, you can actually go inside this object and then just create a in, like so. But you're just overcomplicating because then you have another object, and the easiest way to do it is just connect it directly to your output. But you see here that we actually have a 3D rectangle that we can use to apply this texture. Before we do that, let's go ahead and actually turn this back into a 2D texture since that's our end goal. And the way we want to do that is, one, we need a camera comp, like so. We need a light. For more advanced people, you can also use an environment light, but we're going to skip that today and just use a singular light. Then finally, let's go back to our tops, so our 2D textures, and grab a render. And these three will automatically point to our render. The next thing I'm going to do real quick is connect this to another null and leave a little bit of room because we're going to add some stuff later. Click this blue button on the null to make it our background. And if you want, you can also name it BG for background or whatever. Before we apply the texture, let's go ahead and actually fill this to the screen. So firstly, on the render, on the common tab, you want to make this match the fit that you set here or the base texture, or you can actually increase the resolution if you would like, and there's no reason why you can't do that. But since we're doing a square texture, let's just make sure we make it square like so. And then finally, we just need to position the camera so that way this fills the frame. And the way we do that is by going to camera, setting the view to be orthographic, which will make everything equal distance rather than a perspective view. And then make sure the ortho width is just set to 1. And there we go. Perfectly fills the frame. Sweet. So the very last step to get all of the components working is just to create the material and apply it. And what you might have caught on to already is that if we press tab, there's actually a materials tab. Now, there's a bunch of materials that you could use. And in fact, why not? Let's demonstrate two very quickly. So we'll grab a wireframe, and this is just demonstrating, and a PBR. PBR is the one that we're actually going to use. And you can see they have a lot of different properties to them. A PBR allows us to actually apply different types of maps, which is going to tell the environment how to handle lighting or how to texture the object, which is really useful for our situation. Alternatively, a wireframe doesn't have those maps. And if I apply this wireframe by dragging and dropping it onto geometry, you'll see that it's actually just drawing a line where how the rectangle has been made up. And you can see the rectangle is actually made up of two triangles here. So, but yeah, that's not what we're doing today. Instead, let's drag this PBR material on, and you'll see that on default, it's just this dark gray texture. Then if we click on PBR and go to our maps, we just want to drag our base texture and normal onto the respective categories, like so, base color and base texture. Let's also enable the height map and displace vertices if you would want, but these are just going to be for capturing light. So essentially, there's a whole bunch of different maps we can have and create here. If you download a texture online, they will probably have all of these different maps, but we're just doing something very simple today, and we just need the two. The base texture is just essentially going to be like, hey, what does it look like? And the normal texture in this case is essentially, even though it's a flat object, it's going to be telling the texture / the lighting how to handle light, how to cast shadows and create fake depth, even though there's no actual depth in the texture. And that's great because it's one, computationally a lot easier to calculate, and two, we don't need to create something 3D. All right, recording is still good. So now if I go back to the PBR and then go to the first tab, we can actually play with these different parameters like the roughness and metallicness and all of that to change the way the lighting behaves. Now, at this point, it's completely up to you how to style your object. I obviously do want to bring the roughness down a bit because obviously when it's 100% rough, it's not going to reflect anything. But I also don't want it too metallic because you get something quite shiny. So something around there. Now this is quite dull. And to fix that, we could change the texture, or we can even go to our light and then go to our light. And we have this dimmer option, which we can obviously turn above 1, set it to 2. Another thing I want to do is I want to emphasize the depth. So this light is facing straight on right now. But if I click the plus in the bottom right, I can actually move the light around in 3D space and emphasize the lighting a lot more like that. And you can really see now that this derivative, even though the contrast is quite high, it does look actually embedded into the texture. And we'll go into ways to make that more obvious as we go on. But even if we got rid of the noise right here, you can see that this looks like a 3D texture. Oops, sorry, bumped my mic. It looks like much more of a 3D texture than the one on the right here.
I have like anxiety about it and refuse to go.
Oh. Apologies. I accidentally bumped something on my headphones and triggered a clip. Okay, cool. So this is essentially the entire thing. And in fact, how many minutes into this video? So we're at 16 minutes right now. And the point of the series was to not create 40-minute long tutorials, that are like super in depth. Just create something quick and easy. But with that said, I do want to leave you guys with something looking a little bit nice. So let's do a little bit of refinement and post FX. The first thing I'm going to do is go to this palette up in the top left and go to our image filters, and there's a bunch of amazing pre-made tools here like Bloom and Feedback Edge are two of my favorites to use. And close this down just so it's not in the way. Firstly, I'm going to connect this render into the Feedback Edge, and then the Feedback Edge into the Bloom, and then the Bloom into the background, but it's going to look a little crazy at first. The first thing on the Feedback Edge I'm going to do is click the Reset Pulse, which is going to reinitialize it so it's at the right size. Then let's bring the edge strength, scale, and blur source down. Now, this is all of, this is preferences. This is like, there is no rules to what we're creating right now. So play around with these values and make them whatever you'd like. So we have quite a bright texture here. So Bloom is blowing this out. So if I click on Bloom and start to bring the threshold down, you'll see that it's not blowing out a lot of the image. So let's just leave it at there, and then bring the glow level down a bit, turn off the ramp glow. I should note there's also a Bloom top, but I much prefer this one because it has a lot more creative tools that are great to use. After the Bloom, I'm going to add in a RGB key just so that any of that transparency there is turned into a black instead, so we have a bit more of a smoother transition. And then finally on this Bloom, I'm just going to bring the intensity down and then the threshold up and just play with these elements and maybe bring the Bloom level down. I'm just going to play with this until I get a look that I'm happy with. Oh, I did not mean to change the gamma. I kind of want to get something that's like, slightly overly exposed like that, because that's quite cool in my opinion. Now, again, I'm going for something really intense here. And on the light, I can actually go back to the transform tab, and then on the rotate, I can type in the code ABS and then capital T time.seconds. So this is going to apply this rotation field with the amount of seconds that are transpiring. I'm going to times this by 50, just so it goes really quickly. And this is just to emphasize, the lighting. I'm not trying to create something beautiful right now. I'm just really want to make it dramatic, so that way we can see the upper bounds and lower bounds of the technique that we're using. Finally, if I go back to my PBR and then the maps, we have our bump scale and then displace verticity options. So if I actually increase the bump scale, you'll see that the texture becomes a lot more, it captures the light a lot more intensely. And all of this rugged texture that we see here is actually the noise that we created. See, if I turn that off, you get the noise embedded. What's actually really interesting now is, so this is where Touchdesigner shines, is that all of the features that we applied to the lighting, the 3D environment, and all of that, we can actually apply to the 2D textures in the same way. What I mean by that is if I go to our noise and then also go to our transform tab and then go to like the translate, I can type in that same code I just did, ABS capital T times, sorry, let me slow down. ABS capital T for time dot seconds. And if I times this by a small number, like 0.1, you'll see that the noise, or maybe if I make it a little bit bigger, like so. Oh, we got a lot of movement going on right now. It's actually quite hard to see. If I make this a little bit faster, so we just times it by 1, you can see the noise is actually moving. And so we can create this like weird kind of like moving texture that's like water really, really easily. And in fact, if we even, did like displacement with the base texture and all of that, we can make it all, behave and manipulate and change in 3D in real time. And it's not in the scope of today's tutorial, but there's no reasons why you can't apply these transformations to be controlled by audio or like your hand or anything like that, which is really, to be honest, the biggest strength of Touchdesigner. But from this point forward, depending on what you're trying to create, if you're trying to create something softer, maybe you want to bring the bump scale down. If you're trying to create something with less dramatic lighting, like that, you might want to bring the glow level down, change the glow color. You might want to change the color of the light, like so. You might want to even create two different lights with, two different colors. So I can copy and paste this light, set the rotation to be like negative that, and then change the color to like purple or blue or something like that. Let's bring the bloom. The bloom. So we got like really intense lighting right now. So I'm just having to like change things around. There we go. So now we've got like two lights that are like operating and swinging around and creating something pretty crazy. But the options are limitless. But yeah, I don't know. It's a little bit of a random thing to do a tutorial on, but I'm really curious to see how you guys found this. If you want to explore these kinds of concepts, more, or there's anything in particular that you can do in other softwares that you want to learn in Touchdesigner, please let me know. Like and subscribe is greatly appreciated. And yeah, I hope this video services the need to help you get your mind across what is actually going on here, so that way you can then create these things from scratch entirely by yourself. But yeah, that's pretty much it for today's video. I will catch you in the next one. Peace.